Today I have the pleasure to interview Professor Dave Hoffman, who's Associate Dean and Professor of Organizational Behavior and Strategy at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And Professor Hoffman is a world-renowned expert on leadership, safety, and error management. So I'd like him to share a few of his insights with us. So my first question would be that what is error management in organizations? What happens when companies do not worry about that aspects, and can you give us a few examples?
Sure. Okay, so whenever you have humans working in organizations, you have errors, because parts of the things that make us so effective at processing information as human beings are also the same sorts of things that can cause us to make errors. And so if you have humans in organizations and you have errors, there's really two approaches to managing these errors and eliminating them. First is an error prevention strategy, where you try to put in systems and structures to try to prevent people from making errors. And then the other is assuming that all of those aren't going to work, then you have to have processes in place to help people identify errors that have occurred and then engage in error recovery activities prior to those errors sort of leaving the bounds of the organization and creating significant negative consequences for the organization. So, and in terms of examples, I think most of the time when people think about organizational errors or sort of misfortune, they think about Chernobyl and then Challenger disaster, NASA, and more recently NASA Columbia, and those types of really salient, sort of big events. But I think that really underestimates the typical amount of errors that are occurring within organizations. There's been some research in computer science and information systems that suggests between 20 and 50% of spreadsheets within organizations in use currently have errors, and a couple of examples are currency conversions that aren't done consistently. In one study, they found a $7 million funds transfer that happened by mistake. So there's all kinds of these errors sort of running rampant within organizations. Sometimes they lead to the big failures that you see. Oftentimes they just reside dormant within the organization and cause little smaller problems and issues within the organization. So we have big examples and we have a lot of smaller examples.
What can leaders do to improve the management of errors?
I think from a leadership standpoint, what you need to do is to create first a mindset that these things are important. In certain industries like healthcare, currently, particularly in the United States, there's been a big focus on patient safety and error management and error prevention. In other industries, it's probably not on the forefront of a leader's mind, which is how do they deal with errors. So if they're convinced that this could be a significant problem within the organization, then the issue is how do we create a mindset? So one way leaders create mindsets around things are through inspirational appeals, right? One of the aspects of leadership is to create a vision, cast a sort of compelling vision of what you want the organization to be and to become. And so one aspect of that may be trying to create a mindset around errors. Some other research that we're doing in a slightly different context, but we think has implications for error management, deals with who should be the source of that message and what should be the content of that message. Some other research that we're doing actually suggests that leaders may not be the best source of that message, but that it may be people who have had firsthand exposure to the ramifications of errors. So people that have made a mistake and suffered the consequences may make a much more compelling argument in terms of the importance of this issue for organizations than a leader who's sort of distant saying, yeah, this is important, you should pay attention to it. Particularly if you take a healthcare example, for instance, having a physician say, I made a mistake, I made an error, I didn't catch it, and the patient suffered significant consequences. It's going to be more credible and more believable than the CEO of the hospital doing it. And so that gets a little bit about the source, and also that also starts thinking about the content. And we think, although we're doing research right now to tease this out, that the content should be positive and negative. So in the healthcare context, for example, you might have a physician talking about making an error, a nurse bringing that error to his or her attention, them listening, correcting the error, and preventing some outcome. Conversely, you could have other stories and examples of a physician who made an error. Maybe it was voiced to them, they didn't listen, and the patient suffered severe consequences. And we think that that's going to be a much more credible way to create an impactful communication piece around error management. So that's part of it, is creating the mindset. The second thing that leaders can do is to create systems and structures within organizations such that if I see someone else making an error, it's actually safe to approach them about it. And we have some other research that suggests that there's a relationship piece. Obviously, if I trust you, I'm more likely to do it. But there's also a structural piece. So formally designating a person on the unit as sort of an on-unit consultant for particularly new employees, don't have a lot of experience, that this is a resource for you, that if you have problems or questions or you think you might have made a mistake and you need some help diagnosing what happened, there is this person who has a formal role to do that. And we think that that's also another important way that leaders can influence this within organizations.
Most people would view reporting errors as potentially bearing negative consequences for themselves. What would be the motivation, for them to even talk to the contact that you mentioned about?
Well, I mean, I think that gets back to the mindset. If you understand that not engaging in error management and error recovery is an important part of your job, and if you understand through maybe some of these real salient examples of what are the potential ramifications of this in terms of human life or organizational reputation and harm to customers, then I think you're more likely with that mindset to say, hey, this is important. But coupled with that, you have to have the safety of the context so that the person feels safe raising it, that they're not going to be punished for it either implicitly or explicitly. And then you need a broad organizational culture that really balances fairness and justice and accountability, such that if someone reports an honest mistake, that they're not hung out to dry for it, but rather they are rewarded for discussing it so that they can help the organization recover from it before it creates a real negative problem in a much bigger sphere.
So thank you very much, Dave, for sharing these insights with us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.